Biedermeier, what is this, and why is an event in the art world that lasted only 35 years still interesting today? You've surely heard of Biedermeier. Perhaps you've even pronounced this word with a knowing look at some cultural event. But what is it really? Spoiler! It's not an IKEA furniture item or a German beer brand. The most amusing thing about the history of Biedermeier is the origin of its name. It was a joke. Yes, a genuine parody. Although Biedermeier lasted only 35 years, its influence is still felt today. It laid the foundations for realism, changed attitudes toward the domestic environment, and showed that ordinary life could be the subject of art. And if you've ever sat in a cafe photographing your cappuccino for Instagram or taking a selfie against a sunset backdrop, congratulations, you're continuing the Biedermeier tradition. After all, what does this style do? It aestheticizes everyday life, finds beauty in the ordinary, and shares it with others. In a world where we so often chase the extraordinary and grandiose, Biedermeier reminds us, often happiness is simply a cup of tea in a cozy armchair by a window overlooking a garden. And perhaps this is its main wisdom. You've all surely heard about Biedermeier. But you probably don't know that this artistic movement lasted only about 35 years, from 1814-1815 to 1848-49, and yet had an enormous influence on people's lives. It affected not only literature and painting, architecture, but also changed the everyday sphere of society. What do we know about this time? Why have art historians and literary scholars been increasingly turning to it recently? Why does it resonate so much with today? I'll try to give you the most complete picture of this phenomenon. We'll start with the political prerequisites for its emergence. Then I'll tell you about what this name is and how it appeared. We'll touch on the topic of the first industrial revolution and its influence on the formation of this style, talk a little about literature and very little about philosophy. Then we'll walk through the halls of the Leopold Museum in Vienna and see with our own eyes the paintings, fashion, and everyday objects of this era. And in conclusion, I'll tell you about my favorite artist of this era, with whom my acquaintance with Biedermeier began. I'm sure you'll like him too. So imagine, all of Europe has just experienced the Napoleonic Wars. Everyone is tired of upheavals and just wants to relax at home with a cup of tea. And here Biedermeier is born, the fascinating Biedermeier period, which lasted roughly from the time of the Vienna Congress of 1814-15 to the revolutions of 1848, describes a period of respite in Europe that was shaped by severe political upheavals and social uprisings that deeply changed society. Liberty, equality, and fraternity were replaced by the restoration of the Bourbons. Besides, as you remember, Napoleon's military voyage through Europe had just ended after the Vienna Congress of 1814-1815. A period began in Europe that could be called, "Let's pretend everything is fine." While Metternich, the Austrian statesman, established strict police orders and censorship, ordinary people decided, you know what? Politics is clearly not something worth doing. Let's better focus on our gardens and living rooms. This was something like collective escapism. Can't talk about politics? Well, fine. But you can discuss new embroidery patterns and the latest literary novelties. This was a period of such calm before the German Revolution of 1848-1849. The most fascinating part of Biedermeier's history is the origin of its name. It was a joke. It's a fictional character, a parody of the European bourgeois of this time. Biedermeier is a proper name. The name originated from the play on German words, Biedermann, Philistine, naive, and the surname Meyer. In 1848, the German poet Joseph Victor von Scheffel published two poems, The Evening Cozy Pastime of Biedermann and The Complaints of the Idle Meyer. And in 1850, another German poet, Ludwig Eichrodt, composed a pseudonym from these two words, under which he began to publish sentimental and naive poems and epigrams. Soon works began to appear under the fictional name of Gottlieb Biedermeier, parodying the amateur and absurd poems of a certain Samuel Sauter, a provincial school teacher, as well as stylized parodies by Eichrodt himself and his friend Adolf Kussmaul. In 1869, a collection of poems, comic songs of Biedermeier, Biedermeier's Liederlust, was published, republished by the way, in 1911 under the title The Book of Biedermeier. Gottlieb Biedermeier is a collective image of such a typical bourgeois with a small house, a garden, and dreams of a quiet life. In essence, it's your neighbor who digs in the garden every weekend, collects porcelain elephants, and adores family tea gatherings. In art history, the term Biedermeier was first used in 1894 in an article by G. Böttischer, The Future of Ornament, on the example of wallpaper development, and later in P. Schmidt's book Biedermeier Painting, 1922. By 1900, the word Biedermeier was used figuratively to mean the good old days. In 1927, in German literary studies, this term was also applied to German literature of 1815-1840. Biedermeier, as you understand, was a reaction to the pathos, monumentalism, and discomfort of the preceding Empire style. If Empire is a pompous uncle in full dress uniform reminding you of his greatness at every step, then Biedermeier is his nephew in a comfortable dressing gown who just wants to read a book in an armchair. Empire was the style of empires and states, the embodiment of grandeur and power. And Biedermeier said, "No, thank you, I'd rather stay at home." It was a style of private life and domestic comfort, an expression of the desire for peace and family values. Biedermeier sensed the artistic value of the present, not the past, and was the nurturing environment in which 19th century realism was born. The time of Biedermeier is the time of the first industrial revolution and the development of machine technologies, which led to the construction of the first railway lines and impressive suspension bridges, such as the one connecting Buda and Pest. These technological revolutions, as you understand, justifiably led to decisive changes in the development of art. Many of these innovations came not from Vienna as the center of the Habsburg monarchy, but from the magnificent cities of the lands under the Habsburg crown, such as Budapest, Prague, Ljubljana, etc. It is characteristic that literature is almost not included by scholars in the circle of phenomena defined by this concept, while German researchers associate Biedermeier primarily with literature, in which, earlier than in other arts, the ideological priorities of this phenomenon were formulated, which then received their tangible embodiment in interior and painting. In literature, Biedermeier did an incredible thing. It showed that ordinary life is worthy of being written about. If the hero of Romanticism is a rebellious loner suffering from the imperfection of the world, then the hero of Biedermeier is your neighbor who rejoices that he has grown beautiful tulips. In our everyday life, there are no high passions, but if lucky, there is comfort and warmth of relationships. What's also interesting is that the phenomenon of Biedermeier lies in the absence of any philosophical base, which is not quite usual since the second half of the 18th century and the first half of the 19th century was a time of rapid development of German classical philosophy, Kant, Hegel, Schopenhauer. Biedermeier said, no deep philosophical systems, please. This is the only style that managed to exist parallel to the development of powerful philosophical thought and at the same time not take from it anything. But let's begin our journey through the halls of the Leopold Museum in Vienna, where there is currently a wonderful exhibition of Biedermeier. And the first author we will see at the exhibition is Carlo Canella with his Carlo Canella, Portrait of the painter Giuseppe Cannella in his studio in Milan, 1837. Carlo Cannella was an Italian artist, part of an artistic dynasty. His father, Giovanni Cannella, was engaged in decorative painting, and his older brother, Giuseppe Cannella, was a famous landscape artist, master of city views. This painting is a real treasure trove of visual details and symbols, revealing much about the artist himself, his brother, and the Biedermeier era as a whole. First of all, it's worth noting that this is not just a portrait. It's an image of the artist's older brother, Giuseppe Cannella, and this choice of model speaks of the close family ties characteristic of the Biedermeier era. Carlo depicted his brother with dignity, emphasizing his status as a respected master. Giuseppe's workshop is filled with various objects. Canvases and paintings on the walls, some completed, others in progress, artistic tools arranged with practical neatness, books and sketchbooks, testifying to education and careful preparation for work, items of personal comfort, emphasizing that the studio is also a living space. Carlo Cannella's masterful work with light deserves special attention. The soft, diffused lighting of the studio creates a cozy, intimate atmosphere. The light penetrating through the window, a typical Biedermeier technique, illuminates Giuseppe's figure and his works, symbolically emphasizing the artist's creative inspiration. The contrast between illuminated and shaded areas is not dramatic, as in Baroque painting, but soft and natural, creating a sense of an everyday, unaffected moment, another characteristic feature of Biedermeier. One of the main merits of the painting is the virtuoso rendering of various textures and materials, the shine of the lacquered furniture surface, the softness of Giuseppe's clothing fabrics and draperies, the matte quality of paper and canvas, the texture of walls and wooden surfaces. This attention to the material side of objects is characteristic of the Biedermeier aesthetic, with its love for the tangible, concrete world and its details. Cannella uses a restrained color palette with a predominance of warm brown, ochre, and muted green tones. These colors not only create a sense of comfort, but also reflect the aesthetic preferences of the era when bright, loud colors were considered a sign of bad taste. Compositionally, the artist places his brother's figure slightly to the left of center, balancing it with paintings and objects in the right part of the canvas. This creates a harmonious, balanced space, devoid of drama but filled with life and details. The soft lighting of the studio room and warm tones in the interior are reminiscent of the works of German masters such as Georg Friedrich Kersting. In addition to its artistic value, the painting is a unique historical document showing what an artist's studio looked like in the 1830s, what tools he used, how his work was organized. It's a kind of window to the past, allowing us to peek into the everyday life of a Biedermeier-era artist. Now let's start getting more familiar with the painting of this period. Travel in the Biedermeier era became popular thanks to a combination of economic growth, romantic ideals, improved transport infrastructure, and the middle class's desire for self-education and aesthetic enjoyment. In the Biedermeier era, tourism and mountaineering flourished. The middle class discovered the joy of travel, and artists like Thomas Ender and Marcus Pernhardt were the first to capture many alpine landscapes that no one had painted before. Imagine a bourgeois in a hat and short pants who climbed Mount Matterhorn and stands there with a look. Well, am I cool or what? This is pure Biedermeier. Our first painting is by Thomas Ender, The Matterhorn Scene from Gornergrat, 1854. Thomas Ender is considered one of the most important chroniclers of mountain landscapes. His painting depicts a group of amazed climbers beneath the peak of this difficult but attractive mountain. At that time, the majestic glaciers were still completely untouched by industrial development. Many of them have since either diminished or disappeared altogether. Ender's life can be described by the phrase, "Life was a success." Born into a junk dealer's family, he had a twin brother, artist Johann Nepomuk Ender. At the age of 13, the boys entered the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, and at 17, Thomas received the Academy's first prize in landscape. Thanks to the support of Prince Metternich, Ender participated in an expedition to Brazil, where he created more than 700 drawings and watercolors. He participated in trips to the Middle East and southern Russia, and he died at the venerable age of 82, not bad for the 19th century. And here is Matthias Loder, the Ankogel near Bad Gastein. In 1827, Matthias Loder was an artist and illustrator. From an early age, he was fascinated by the alpine world. He created numerous watercolors and drawings that captured alpine landscapes, traditional costumes of the rural population, as well as the working world of the metallurgical industry. Like many of his contemporaries, he died prematurely from tuberculosis. The painting, The Ankogel near Bad Gastein, shows us a group of people in traditional alpine clothing, presumably mountain guides or hunters, standing on a rocky ledge and contemplating a majestic mountain range. The central element of the painting is an impressive snow-covered mountain with steep rocky slopes and glaciers. The valley below creates a dramatic contrast with the massive snow-covered peaks. The artist, fascinated by the alpine world from an early age, created a detailed composition where miniature human figures emphasize the grandeur of nature. Marcus Bernhardt, Großglockner seen from Hohenwartshardt, 1860. Marcus Bernhardt was a Slovenian-Austrian artist who worked in the genre of romantic landscapes. According to the Slovenian Biographical Dictionary, he is considered the first Slovenian realistic landscape artist. Marcus was the eldest child of Andreas Pernat, a carpenter. He probably attended elementary school. He started drawing early and earned money through this. He painted bedsteads, chests, and offered his early humorous works at the weekly fair in Klagenfurt. At the age of 12, he painted the guest rooms of a local inn. The innkeeper introduced him to the episcopal chaplain. The latter noticed and supported the talented boy. Under the pseudonym Bernhardt, he became the most famous landscape painter of his time. Bernhardt depicted landscapes, predominantly lakes and high mountain motifs or castles, as well as animals and still lifes in an idyllic and pathetic style. Here, in this painting, he demonstrates virtuoso mastery in depicting the majestic Großglockner mountain range, Austria's highest peak, from the Hohenwartshardt viewing point. The artist uses the classical technique of coulisse composition, where the foreground with figures of people on a rocky ledge serves as a kind of frame for the main motif, the majestic mountain peaks. This creates an effect of depth and spatial perspective. The work is executed in a palette characteristic of alpine landscape painting. Cold blue tones of the sky contrast with the whiteness of the snowy peaks and warm hues of rocks and vegetation in the foreground. Bernhardt demonstrates exceptional accuracy and detail in depicting the geological features of the mountain terrain. The structure of rocks, cracks, fractures, glaciers are clearly visible. He introduces into the composition figures of people in traditional alpine clothing, which not only creates scale, but also reflects the romantic perception of the relationship between man and nature characteristic of the era. Note the transmission of atmospheric effects of the highlands. The airy haze emphasizes the depth of space and monumentality of the mountain peaks. Pernhardt's work is valuable not only as an artistic piece, but also as a historical document, recording the state of alpine glaciers in the 19th century before the period of their intensive melting began. And the next author is Heinrich Reinhold, Artists Exploring the Austrian Alps, 1819. Heinrich was the son of portraitist and genre painter Johann Reinhold and the younger half-brother of landscape artist Friedrich Reinhold. He first studied at the Academy of Arts in Dresden, then in Vienna, and then in Paris. He lived and worked in Rome for 5 years and traveled through different regions of Italy, always recording his impressions in landscape studies. Reinhold lived a short but vivid life. He died in Rome at the age of only 36 years old. In this painting, Reinhold captured his fellow painters studying mountain landscapes. Artists such as Caspar David Friedrich, John Ruskin, and Reinhold himself sought to convey the grandeur of nature, its power and spiritual depth. The Alps, with their grandiose peaks, gorges, and changeable weather, perfectly embodied the romantic idea of nature as a source of inspiration, awe, and contemplation. And the next author is Ferdinand Georg Waldmüller and his canvas Dachstein with Gossosee, 1834. Dachstein is a mountain range on the border of Upper Austria and Styria, and Gossosee is a picturesque lake at its foot. This place is located not far from today's world-famous Hallstatt and has always attracted nature lovers. His works possess that amazing luminosity and attention to detail that today make museum visitors instinctively reach for their smartphones to capture this beauty. His art remains majestic and inspiring to this day. The artist became famous as a master of landscapes and portraits, leaving a legacy that includes about 1,200 works. He was born in Vienna to a civil servant's family. At the age of 14, the boy began training at the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts and soon found a way to earn a living by creating miniature portraits. At 18, he was appointed a drawing teacher in the house of Count Giule in Zagreb, where he met his first wife, a singer of the court opera. With her, he traveled around Europe, working on theatrical scenery, and simultaneously developed his mastery by taking painting lessons. By the age of 36, Waldmüller received the position of curator of the picture gallery at the Academy, and by 42, the title of Academy Counselor. But he showed himself as a true revolutionary when he published critical articles, speaking out against outdated teaching methods at the Academy. Instead of academic copying of old masters, he proposed painting from nature. This led to a scandal. He was expelled from the Academy and stripped of all his titles. He was a true revolutionary. Can you imagine what a scandal? Today it sounds like a professor was expelled for suggesting students go outside to draw real trees instead of studying paintings of trees. For some time, Waldmüller was in a difficult moral and financial situation and was forced to exhibit his works in the fashion salon of his second wife, Anna Bayer. However, already in 1856, at age 63, thanks to exhibitions at Buckingham Palace, Cologne, and London, interest in him returned. His name became one of the most respected among European artists of the mid-19th century. The first thing that strikes you in this painting is the amazing work with light. Waldmüller was a true light hunter, and in this painting he demonstrates real mastery in conveying sunlight refracted in the transparent waters of an alpine lake. It seems that an almost physically palpable radiance emanates from the canvas. The artist uses a special technique of applying paints in thin layers, which creates an effect of inner luminescence. No wonder some art historians consider Waldmüller a predecessor of the Impressionists in their work with light and color. Upon careful examination of the painting, the artist's amazing mastery in conveying the smallest details is revealed. The crystal clear water of the lake in which the mountains are reflected. Carefully painted trees in the foreground with discernible bark texture and fluttering foliage, the play of light and shadow on the mountain slopes, tiny figures of people emphasizing the grandeur of nature. This scrupulous accuracy is one of the characteristic features of Biedermeier. But with Waldmüller, it is devoid of dryness and pedantry. It is poetic and vital. After the removal of restrictions imposed by the Napoleonic Wars, trade flourished again. Cities such as Vienna, Budapest, and Trieste became centers of trade with the Middle East. Despite the typical Biedermeier limitations to the microcosm of everyday life and immediate surroundings, artists of that period turned to distant countries and cities to satisfy people's curiosity and interest in foreign cultures. This was the 19th century version of TV travel shows and Instagram, only very slow. But how beautiful! Travel again became a necessity, and artists sought to cross borders in search of new impressions. And now, Thomas Ender. In 1817, after several study trips, he was awarded the Great Painter's Prize. The winning canvas was purchased by Prince Clemens von Metternich, who became Ender's patron. He accompanied an expedition commissioned by Emperor Franz I, undertaken by 13 natural scientists from Trieste to Brazil, and returned from this trip with more than 1,000 watercolor sketches. Now on the screen is his watercolor pencil sketch, View from Corcovado towards Catumbi and Sierra dos Órganos, 1817-1818. Now there is a national park. Corcovado is a granite mountain near Rio de Janeiro. It is known primarily for the 38-meter statue of Christ the Redeemer. Catumbi is now a working-class district of Rio. And the second sketch is Panorama of the city Rio de Janeiro, seen from terrace of the Morro da Conceição, 1817-1818. Once they arrived in Rio, Ender painted the luxuriant tropical forests, the many churches, public buildings and squares, and the piped water system built in 1740. He wandered through the suburbs and the surrounding hills. He painted the famous church of Maria de Gloria. He organized small expeditions and climbed the Corcovado, from where he was able to capture wonderful views over Rio de Janeiro. The panorama from Morro da Conceição represents one of Ender's most ambitious compositions, providing a comprehensive view of colonial Rio de Janeiro. The broad view made from the terrace of the high Morro da Conceição is projected, already in the second plane, in the urban space of Old Rio, reaching Corcovado and Pão de Açúcar in the background. This is also a watercolor pencil sketch, front view of the Parthenon with the Erechtheion, 1837. This trip in 1837 to Greece would have provided Ender with the opportunity to study and document the ancient Greek monuments, including the Parthenon and the Erechtheion on the Acropolis of Athens. Ender's work during this period represents part of the 19th century European fascination with Greek antiquity and the documentation of ancient monuments. His paintings grew to be very popular and were often engraved by artists in England. As a landscape painter and watercolorist, Ender would have been particularly well suited to capture both the architectural grandeur of these ancient buildings and their setting within the Athenian landscape. Johann Michael Sattler originally worked as a portraitist in Vienna, and then in 1819 moved to Salzburg, where in 1824 he received a commission for a portrait of Emperor Franz IV. The emperor was so enchanted by Sattler's mastery in painting and the beauty of the city that he wanted to see Salzburg with its romantic surroundings depicted in a panoramic view. That same year, Sattler began creating sketches for his city panorama, completing it in 1829 with the help of Friedrich Loos and Johann Joseph Schindler. Actually, panoramic painting began with a small circular painting of Edinburgh, painted by Irishman Robert Baker, and this new art form was even patented. Soon after, numerous other round paintings with cityscapes, mountain landscapes, or battle scenes were created in Europe. Many of these panoramas went on tour, were exhibited in different cities, and enjoyed great viewer response. Sattler's panorama is the only preserved tourist panorama in the world. After completing the panorama, Salzburg, with its romantic surroundings, he embarked on a 10-year cruise around Europe, which lasted until 1839, aboard his own ship, accompanied by his wife and children. They visited Munich, Linz, Brno, Prague, Dresden, Magdeburg, Leipzig, Berlin, Hamburg, Copenhagen, Gothenburg, Oslo, Groningen, Amsterdam, Utrecht, Rotterdam, Brussels, Paris, Portsmouth, Cologne, Frankfurt, Strasbourg, and Nuremberg. Thus, he made a significant contribution to the popularity of the city of Salzburg and was probably the first advertiser of tourism in Salzburg. By presenting the panorama everywhere he went, he acted as the first important ambassador of the charm of the city of Salzburg. The painting from 1833 depicts his family in the cabin of his ship. His son, Hubert Sattler, following in his father's footsteps, also became a landscape painter, traveled the world, and, based on his own sketches and templates of other artists, created large format canvases of Constantinople, Cairo, New York, and many other places, which he exhibited in Europe and abroad. He viewed his works as educational material and was very precise in topography and details. Not many could travel then, but interest in new travels was very high. Now on screen, Cosmorama, the Colossi of Memnon in the Nile Valley, 1846. He traveled widely and was noted for large and minutely detailed cosmorama paintings of cities, monuments, and landscapes of many countries. Sattler's cosmoramas represented a pioneering form of immersive visual travel experience in the pre-photographic era. They originally had to be viewed through a peep box, which intensified the suggestive power of the foreign and faraway cities and landscapes even more. This viewing method created an early form of virtual reality, allowing 19th century audiences to experience distant monuments like the Acropolis and Ottoman Istanbul.
Now on screen, Cosmorama, the first cataract of the Nile near Aswan, 1846. The first cataract was located near Aswan in modern Egypt. With the construction of the Aswan hydroelectric power station, 1960-71, the cataracts are now in Lake Nasser and are no longer an obstacle to navigation. This is Cosmorama Acropolis, 1855. Hubert Sattler's cosmoramas were produced in meticulous brush technique in the artist's studio. As a work aid, he had a rich supply of usually very detailed sketches collected on his travels. He was almost constantly on the road searching for motifs. The works demonstrate extraordinary attention to architectural detail and atmospheric accuracy.
And here is Cosmorama Istanbul seen from the Eyüp Cemetery, 1851. The paintings were created with meticulous brushwork and are characterized by strict realism and a precision of detail that is unparalleled. Today, these cosmoramas serve as invaluable historical records of 19th century views of the Acropolis and Ottoman Istanbul, preserving architectural and cultural details that may have since changed or been lost. Now you can see landscape near Tivoli with wine harvest. 1846. The passion for travel of the artist Karoli Marko the Elder makes him a typical artist of the Biedermeier era. Born in Leuchau, he took drawing lessons from his father in Klausenburg and Pest, now Budapest, before studying engineering. In 1832, he moved to Rome, where he created idealizing paintings in the traditions of Claude Lorrain, Nicolas Poussin, and Johann Nepomuk Schödelberger, capturing the splendor of the city's light and its surrounding landscapes. In Italy, where all artists aspire, he studied the works of famous painters of the past, read Homer and Horace, was interested in ancient myths. Most of his works written during this period are typical Italian landscapes in the classical style, supplemented with ruins of ancient castles and figurines of people. In this case, Tivoli near Rome also served him merely as a pretext for creating a shining ideal, 22 combined with the ability to convey the beauty and richness of nature. Despite some generalization, he excellently combines characteristic elements. Thanks to the means of color perspective, he managed to depict air very precisely and tenderly. Johann Nepomuk Schödelberger and his ideal landscape, The Evening. 1817. Johann Nepomuk Schödelberger was an Austrian artist known for his landscapes. He was born and died in Vienna. Born into a poor family, Schödelberger showed a talent for drawing even before he learned to write. He even taught other children to draw while still very young. This attracted the attention of local patrons who helped him develop his abilities. He was largely self-taught, but from 1797 taught drawing in Vienna schools. In 1815, he was elected to the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, where he later became a teacher. Among his students was, for example, Ferdinand Waldmüller. Schödelberger was inspired by the works of Claude Lorrain and Jacob van Ruysdael, as well as by his journey to Italy in 1817 to 1818. His style tended toward depicting idealized landscapes, which were popular with patrons such as Franz II and Ludwig of Bavaria. In the 19th century, genre painting became very successful with the bourgeois public.
Friedrich Gauermann's and his small work, Farmer Returning Home. It is one of the most stunning and poetic testimonies to his studies of the Alpine foothills that he so loved, their lands, and the farmers who cultivated it. A farmer and his companions calmly wander into the depth of the landscape. As if by miracle, the large puddle behind them, which they must have just waded through, seems untouched, creating a perfect mirror in the center of the image. Gauermann was born in the lower Austrian town of Miesenbach to a family of German artist Jakob Gauermann, who was his first teacher. The father early recognized the artistic talent of his sons Carl and Friedrich and encouraged it in every way. It became clear in early childhood that Friedrich would most likely become a more talented and brilliant artist. His brother died at the age of 24. From 1822 to 1827, he studied at the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts and made numerous study trips to Styria, Salzburg, Tyrol, Dresden, Venice, and Munich, before being appointed to the Academy as a landscape painter in 1836.
This is his next painting, Returning Home Before the Storm. 1845. His works show the influence of the Dutch school, which clearly influenced the creation of the Viennese naturalistic landscape. In 1826, he first exhibited his paintings, which were characterized by light and atmospheric effects. After a great exhibition success in 1830, he began to populate his forest and mountain landscapes with animals, in the depiction of which he achieved amazing realism, which became typical for Gauermann's paintings. At the Vienna Art Exhibition of 1838, Gauermann was placed at the forefront of landscape painting. Until the 1840s, he received numerous commissions for paintings of this kind from the Viennese aristocracy, Prince Metternich, Schwarzenberg, Liechtenstein, and earned well. As the tastes of contemporaries gradually changed after 1848, success declined and there were fewer patrons. Moreover, under the influence of the Munich school, he succumbed to the sweet Alpine style, which does not diminish his original significance for Austrian Biedermeier landscape painting. Gauermann studied his subjects in nature. His depictions of animals stand out in their kind in Austrian painting. His outstanding artistic historical significance lay in his mastery of drawing and color. He left behind 1185 oil paintings and 174 drawings. His estate was auctioned off, but the proceeds slipped from the hands of his widow, who even during his lifetime did not know how to handle money, and she ended up in an almshouse. The painting restored to new life, 1852. Undoubtedly, Ferdinand Waldmüller idealized peasant life. Here we see an elderly farmer who has recovered from a serious illness, leaving his house for the first time surrounded by his family. The action takes place on one of the first days of spring, as hinted by the tender buds and small leaves on the tree and bush, as well as the flowers in the hand and apron of the girl in the foreground. Thus, the title of the painting refers not only to the recovering man, but also to nature awakening from a harsh winter. With this work, Waldmüller created a piercing hymn to life, the spring sun, and the power of nature's renewal. Early Spring in the Vienna Woods, 1862. Waldmüller apparently loved the theme of early spring very much. This painting, Early Spring in the Vienna Woods, was created by Waldmüller a year before his death as a third version, which, in turn, was preceded by 3 variants. In these 6 versions, the landscape takes on increasing significance compared to the previous ones. With Waldmüller's characteristic precision, with strong contrasts of light and shadow and bright, pure colors, the artist creates a realistic forest background. Bright light penetrates through the bare branches of trees. Their budding buds herald the approach of spring. Sunlight seems to separate the 2 children collecting violets from the shady slope on which a huge beech trunk grows. The Interrupted Pilgrimage, 1858. Simple people in peasant clothing set out on a pilgrimage, carrying a crucifix adorned with flowers, which is carried by a young boy. Now they stop for prayer on a rocky landscape. A group of believers is in the background on the right. However, in the foreground, a weak young female pilgrim lies in bright sunlight, with women compassionately caring for her. In this compelling figural composition of an ascending triangle, Waldmüller draws on a long tradition of Christian depictions of the crucifixion. At the top is the crucified Christ. At his feet, only his beloved disciple and women, at the center of whom Mary, the mother of Jesus, has fallen prostrate. Evoking fundamental themes in seemingly insignificant situations is a typical feature of Biedermeier Vienna painting. Our knowledge of Biedermeier fashion is based on 2 important sources: paintings from that time and rare and valuable preserved clothing items from that period. Men, serious as bankers, sharp as their collars. The typical Biedermeier-era fashionista looked like someone who really wanted to impress your grandmother. His wardrobe necessarily included a redingote, a long-fitted frock coat. The name comes from the English riding coat. Yes, initially this was clothing for horseback riding, although most fashionable men used it rather for walks to the nearest cafe. The father-killer collar, and no, this is not an exaggeration, this tall, starched collar with sharp points was actually called Vatermörder, German for father-killer. According to legend, a son once rushed to embrace his father, and the sharp end of the collar hit him in the eye, which led to a fatal outcome. Whether this is true or not, the name stuck. The advantage of such a collar was that it hid double chins, especially valued by English King George IV when he gained weight, and demonstrated that you were so wealthy that you didn't need to work physically. After all, try working with a shovel with such a weapon on your neck. Women from column to hourglass. Women's fashion made an impressive journey. At the beginning of the century, ladies imitated ancient statues in dresses with raised waistlines under the bust. Particularly desperate fashionistas wore the thinnest muslin dresses and even sprinkled them with water for better fit. The result? Stunning appearance and pneumonia. Beauty required sacrifices in the most literal sense. By the middle of the Biedermeier era, the waistline had dropped to its natural place. The corset returned to fashion, and sleeves inflated to incredible sizes, apparently to compensate for the narrow waist constricted by the corset. The dresses of those times were a real architectural structure. Biedermeier fashion sought to create an effect of sensational nudity, despite the fact that women were wrapped from head to toe. Victorian contradictions in all their glory. So if you think modern fashion is strange, just remember the father-killer collars and moistened dresses from which one could depart for the other world. By comparison, modern trends are just a walk in the park. Ferdinand Georg Waldmüller's Lady in a White Dress, 1833. Décolletage becomes more revealing. The neck is emphasized, hairstyles become more complex. Accessories play a special role. Shawls, umbrellas, gloves, beads, fans, and handbags. Pearl is very popular. Necklaces, various chains, long earrings, brooches, as well as decorative ornaments for hairstyles. Ladies' favorites at this time are bonnets and hoods. This is a time of needlework, many different types of embroidery and lace. The transition from Empire-style dress to Biedermeier lasted about 8 to 10 years. By 1850, when Hungarian artist Josef Borzos created his rather liberal interpretation of girls after the ball, the at first glance unsophisticated, antiquated, and almost simple fashion of the Empire style was already a thing of the past. In the years after 1820, the elfin creatures with their draped mantles gave way to the elaborately dressed Biedermeier ladies, adorned with numerous ruffles and taffeta, and wearing bright colors, corsets, and crinolines. In the 1840s, women's fashion became increasingly sophisticated, skirts wider. It was not uncommon for the hem of a round skirt to reach 10 meters. Biedermeier-style interiors, when the bourgeoisie decided that comfort was more important than showing off. Biedermeier played a huge role in changing the interiors of premises and organizing the inner life of the home. Biedermeier is home sweet home, with small but spacious and bright rooms filled with comfortable and practical furniture. It's so cozy to sit in a soft armchair and do needlework, embroidering a tobacco pouch for your beloved husband, because smartphones hadn't been invented yet and you had to keep your hands busy with something. Imagine you sit at a desk or at a secretary desk with many drawers where you store your heart's treasures, read, a collection of receipts and old buttons that you can't get rid of. Nearby is a shelf with flowers or a showcase with a collection of figurines that your guests politely praise, thinking to themselves, God, why so many porcelain shepherdesses? On the floor is a soft carpet. Near the fireplace plays a puppy or kitten or sweet children who in reality would probably wreak havoc in 3 minutes. From the window opens a view of a wonderful garden. In general, absolute cuteness, for which the heart was so longing after a series of wars and revolutions. Aristocrats would probably curl their lips in disdain, but the middle class was delighted. Furniture for the people. Most of the furniture was placed along the walls and corresponded to the idea of customizable use, not presentation parade. Goodbye to the times when furniture was displayed as if saying, look how expensive I am and you can't even sit on me. Importantly, decent furniture became available to the middle class. If previously people of modest means could only afford very cheap furniture and only the most necessary, like a chair not to eat standing up, Biedermeier, thanks to the Industrial Revolution and cheaper production, was able to provide decent and inexpensive furniture for the middle class. Initially, floorboards and parquet predominated on the floor. Gradually, they gave way to carpets. Yes, even then people realize that it's more pleasant to walk on something soft than to clack heels on boards. The transition from restrained flatness to geometric or floral ornaments was also reflected in the decoration of walls with interesting wallpaper patterns produced in Austria. Paper wallpaper came into fashion, which, unlike wall finishes of silk, leather, or painting, was affordable for the middle class. Finally, one could say, my walls are also fashionable, not just walls. Walls were decorated with engravings, watercolors, and oil paintings, which often hung in several rows, one above the other. All of them were of small size. Often these were watercolors or drawings by the owners themselves. Yes, imagine the first selfies in history only with a brush. Having a home library was considered good manners. Tall bookcases were installed along the walls, and of course many books were for show. Some things never change. In the mid-1820s, textile elements became of great importance in furniture. Soft furniture was upholstered with small striped chintz or striped rep. They tried to make the pattern on window curtains and furniture upholstery the same. The first attempt in history to create a designer interior, which today's Instagram bloggers would be delighted with. Josef Ulrich Dannhauser's workshop opened up a completely new world when he allowed his clients to order entire interior items from catalogs from 1814. Can you imagine? The IKEA of the 19th century. Only instead of a pictorial instruction and a hexagonal key, you received a ready-made piece of furniture. In Rudolf von Alt's and Thomas Ender's watercolors, depictions of interiors developed into independent artistic genres. Many Biedermeier-style interiors were subsequently captured in photographs, although they were unable to document the colors of the rooms. Well, Instagram with filters hadn't been invented then. The interior of rooms can be more clearly seen watercolor, which captured Archduke Karl's bedroom around 1846. It shows the colors of the original furniture produced at the Dannhauser factory. The room is dominated by cool colors, especially the green color of the walls, which forms an elegant contrast with numerous white textile elements. The walls were painted in the fashionable shade of Schweinfurt green, a highly toxic pigment that was discovered in Vienna in 1805 and first produced on an industrial scale in Schweinfurt. Yes, in those days, a fashionable interior could literally kill you with its beauty, slowly poisoning you with arsenic from the paint. Now let's switch our attention and talk about the influence of Biedermeier on fashion, industry, and everyday life. The 19th century became the second heyday of Bohemian glass. Bohemian glass became more accessible thanks to serial production and new technologies. Now not only aristocrats could drink wine from beautiful goblets, the middle class also decided that they deserved to drink their punch from something more elegant than a clay mug. Colored glass, masters such as Friedrich Egermann, developed ruby and hyalite, opal glass, imitating precious stones. I don't have enough money for a ruby necklace. No problem, I'll order ruby goblets, thought many a bourgeois lady. Multi-layer glass. The technique of overlaying colored and transparent layers with subsequent engraving reached its peak, allowing the creation of spectacular vases, goblets, and decanters. Fine plant ornaments, floral motifs, landscapes, or genre scenes were applied using grinding wheels. The first 3D printer in history, only very slow and requiring craftsmanship. Glass decoration often reflected romantic ideals, nature, rural life, family values. For example, goblets could be decorated with scenes of picnics or floral garlands. All these bucolic scenes on glass said, "Look, there lives a romantic in my soul even though I deal in textile trade." Exquisite products from craft metal casting were first made in Central Europe at Prussian foundries in Gliwice, 1798, Berlin, 1804, and Neuwied Seine Ironworks, 1817. Who would have thought that cast iron, this brutal material, would become a decoration of bourgeois living rooms? Many metallurgical plants, including the foundry in Upper Styria near Mariazell, produce both everyday items and jewelry, although the latter were not particularly popular because due to the thin and elegant casting they broke easily. Imagine the disappointment of a lady whose cast iron brooch broke right at the ball. There's your industrial revolution.
A candlestick from the Verbna foundry in the form of a caryatid carrying a candlestick came as a new item to the collection of crafts and manufactured goods in 1818. Later, the collection was placed in the Vienna Polytechnic Institute on Karlsplatz. Although the use of cast iron for candlesticks was a novelty, it never prevailed over the dominance of silver. After all, boasting a silver candlestick was much more pleasant than a cast iron one. Some things don't change.
Biedermeier also played a significant role in the development of porcelain, in particular the Meissen manufactory. It's clear that the tastes of the bourgeoisie differed from those of the aristocracy, and the Meissen manufactory, 1814, made a difficult but correct business decision to switch its focus to producing things for which there was high demand, rather than art objects as before. The main criterion became practicality and functionality. We don't need a porcelain statue of Apollo. Give us a good coffee cup instead, said the middle class. In reality, for the Meissen manufactory, this was the only way out. The markets of Russia and Turkey were lost after the events of 1806, Russo-Turkish War. France was lowering prices for its porcelain. A solution had to be found urgently. They even wanted to sell the manufactory, but Elector William II rejected this proposal, as Meissen porcelain was a symbol of Saxony. "Sell Meissen? It's easier to give up the crown," he probably exclaimed. They gathered mechanized production, but left a fairly large percentage of manual labor. They found a new method of gilding that did not require polishing after final firing. They diversified the types of gilding. They found their own kaolin deposits and improved the quality of porcelain and reduced production costs. They began to use engraved painting, which had long been used in England and France. Landscape and floral motifs with rather complex paintings received great development. If you can't beat competitors with quality or price, win with innovation. The manufactory managers could have written in their business plan, if business plans existed then. As a result of all the measures taken, the Meissen manufactory received new development and successfully exists to this day. So when you drink coffee from a cup with blue swords, know that you are holding in your hands a history of survival. Now let's return to painting. Along with portraits glorifying realistic likenesses of those depicted and documenting their social status, themes from everyday life dominated the visual world. Family portraits, genre paintings, and images of the artist's own surroundings. If gods and heroes used to grace the paintings, now Aunt Martha knitting socks took center stage, a real revolution in art. Paintings of this period were characterized by a small format of canvases to fit on the wall of a modest bourgeois living room. Careful and fine manner of painting, and especially a passion for small details. Biedermeier artists were the first pixels of their time. They tried to capture every fold, every button, every leaf with such precision that today's photographers would nervously smoke aside. Portrait painting of the Biedermeier era smoothly developed from classicism similarities. The tendency of the previous era toward idealization increasingly gave way to a realistic approach, which first culminated in the 1830s. If previously artists kindly forgot to draw the client's double chin, now they fixed it with anatomical precision. Instagram filters hadn't been invented yet. Sometimes this tendency toward realism led to portraits with features reminiscent of caricature, when artists isolated and focused on the facial features of a person, whether old or young. Did you know that you have a very expressive nose? Let's make it the center of the composition. Such an artist might suggest, and it was impossible to refuse. A characteristic feature of the Biedermeier era is the family portrait. The domestic sphere was especially important during this period as a place of refuge from espionage and state censorship. At home, even the walls help not to come under police surveillance, people of that time might have said. Capturing one's family in portraits became fashionable, and family members were often depicted in lively interaction, like the first family photos, only they had to pose for hours, while their social position and wealth were reflected in the precious fabrics and surroundings of the main characters. Now you can see Józef Tomink's painting, Three Ladies of the Moscon Family, 1829. He was a famous Slovenian portrait artist working in the Biedermeier and Classicism styles. He created one of his most famous works, the group portrait Three Ladies of the Moscon Family, or Portrait of Three Ladies from the Moscon Family, around the 1830s. This work is an important example of portrait art from the first half of the 19th century and is kept in the National Gallery of Slovenia in Ljubljana. Giuseppe Tomink was quite successful in honestly depicting his models. His approach could be described as, "I'm sorry, madam, but you really do have three chins and I'll paint them all." At that time, this was considered a compliment. Finally, art stopped lying, at least not as much as before. The painting depicts three elegant women from the aristocratic Moscon family, dressed according to the fashion of the time. Tomink masterfully conveyed not only their appearance but also their characters, subtly working out the details of clothing, hairstyles, and accessories. The artist was famous for his ability to accurately convey the characters of the portrayed and the details of their appearance, which made him a sought-after portraitist among the aristocracy and bourgeoisie of Central Europe at that time. This is Ferdinand Waldmüller and his painting Elisabeth Waldmüller, the artist's mother. 1830. It is a portrait of Teresa Waldmüller, the artist's mother, completed in 1830. This work is considered one of the key works in Waldmüller's oeuvre and an excellent example of his portrait mastery. The portrait depicts an elderly woman in simple black clothing with a white collar and cap. The artist conveyed his mother's facial features with great warmth and tenderness, reflecting in them the wisdom, dignity, and calmness inherent in a person who has lived a long life. A deep emotional connection between the artist and the portrayed is felt in the work. Waldmüller meticulously worked out every detail, from wrinkles on the face to folds on the clothing, which is characteristic of his style. The painting is executed in a restrained color palette, with an emphasis on the face, standing out against a dark background. Portrait on the right. The shipmaster Matthias Waldmüller is a portrait of the artist's father, created in 1837. Matthias Waldmüller was a sea captain, and the artist depicted him in appropriate uniform with elements indicating his profession. The artist masterfully conveyed his father's character, his determination, confidence, and experience of a naval officer. The painting traces the typical precision of execution and realistic depiction characteristic of Waldmüller. Painting on the left is The Flower Greeting. 1862 is a vivid example of a genre scene in the master's execution, where an everyday moment of life is transformed into a poetic image saturated with freshness and vital force. This work reflects the artist's interest in depicting youth, beauty, and spontaneity of feelings, as well as his special attention to female images. Waldmüller managed to masterfully convey the girl's facial expression, a mixture of excitement, joy, and expectation, which gives the painting a special emotional depth. The artist virtuosically uses light, which plays on the girl's face and flower, creating a joyful, fresh atmosphere. Bright daylight emphasizes the youth and beauty of the heroine. This work belongs to the late period of Waldmüller's creativity, when the artist achieved the highest mastery in conveying light effects and emotional states of his characters. The painting traces Waldmüller's characteristic attention to simple life plots filled with deep emotional content. On the right is Mother with Children Returning Home, 1863. It is one of the artist's last works, created 2 years before his death. The painting depicts a young mother returning home accompanied by her children. The action takes place in a rural area characteristic of the Austrian landscape of that time. The composition is built so that the viewer's gaze is first attracted to the figures of the characters and then moves to the surrounding landscape. Waldmüller uses soft evening lighting, creating a warm, cozy atmosphere. The rays of the setting sun gild the figures of the heroes, emphasizing their significance in the composition. The painting is filled with a sense of calmness, home comfort, and family warmth. The artist conveys a deep emotional connection between mother and children. Waldmüller combines a realistic depiction of characters and the environment with some idealization, characteristic of the Biedermeier tradition. Both paintings are vivid examples of the artist's late work, when his technique reached the highest perfection. In these works, Waldmüller reveals himself as a master capable of conveying not only the external, visible side of life, but also its deep emotional content. The paintings are united by the theme of family values, so significant for Biedermeier art. The artist celebrates simple human joys, the warmth of interpersonal relationships, the beauty of everyday life. Particularly noteworthy is Waldmüller's mastery in conveying light effects. Light in his paintings is not just a means of illuminating the scene, but the most important expressive element, creating mood and emphasizing the emotional component of the plot. These works became a kind of testament of the artist, his affirmation of the value of simple human life, family ties, and human harmony with nature, ideas that he carried through all his creativity. Ernst Christian Moser and his painting, Portrait of the Artist's Mother, 1859. Ernst Christian Moser, 1815-1867, was an Austrian artist who worked predominantly during the late Biedermeier period and the beginning of realism in Austrian art. Although his name is not as well known as those of other Austrian masters of that time, his work is of significant interest for the history of 19th century art. The artist was known primarily for his portraits and genre scenes, which reflected the everyday life of Austrian society in the mid-19th century. His works are distinguished by attention to detail, careful elaboration, and psychological depth. Portrait of the Artist's Mother, created in 1859, is one of Moser's significant works. This piece belongs to the late period of the artist's creativity, when he achieved maturity and mastery in portrait painting. The painting depicts an elderly woman, the artist's mother, in clothing characteristic of that time. Moser conveys with great skill not only the external features of the model, but also her inner world. In the facial expression of the artist's mother, one can read life wisdom, calmness, and dignity. The portrait is executed in a realistic manner with careful elaboration of details, facial features, clothing folds, accessories. The color palette is restrained, with a predominance of dark tones, which was typical for portrait painting of that time. This work is not only an artistic piece, but also a document of its era, reflecting both the visual culture of the mid-19th century and the personal history of the artist himself. Johann Baptist Reiter is among the most interesting personalities among artists, as he often invented unconventional compositions. Here you can see Reading Boy, 1860. The boy in this work is immersed in a book, but he is depicted in such a way that viewers can look directly into his face. This is almost a classical pose, reminiscent of Rembrandt's portrait of his son Titus, kept in the Museum of Art History in Vienna, which may have served as Reiter's source of inspiration. Reiter's painting is charming due to the subtle direction of light, which makes this everyday scene so attractive. The fingers of the right hand seem almost intertwined with the book and are carefully molded by sidelight. The painting further illustrates that by the 19th century, reading had become accessible to a large part of the population. Softcover editions were an invention of the first half of the 19th century. And again, Johann Baptist Reiter. The Noodle Eater, 1849. This work is interesting not only as an artistic piece, but also as a valuable historical document reflecting the way of life and food culture of the 19th century. It demonstrates the artist's attention to simple, seemingly insignificant moments of everyday life, in which he was able to see and show a kind of poetry. The painting is distinguished by careful elaboration of details, from clothing folds to the texture of food and dishes. Reiter uses directed light, which highlights the main character and creates contrasting, expressive lighting characteristic of genre painting of that time. Painting Mother with Child, 1846. Reiter captured a scene from the life of a simple peasant woman. The woman is depicted with an infant, whom she carries on her back in a special sling or backpack cradle, a common way of carrying children among peasants of that time, allowing mothers to work while maintaining closeness with the child. In her hands, the woman holds a bunch of onions, evidence of her working days and a symbol of simple peasant life. Compositionally, the figure of the mother occupies a central position in the painting. The vertical composition emphasizes her steadfastness and strength. Reiter creates an image of a worker who combines maternal duties with everyday work. The painting is a valuable historical testimony about the life of Austrian peasants in the mid-19th century, showing the specifics of their way of life, clothing, ways of caring for children. The painting is executed in a restrained, earthy color palette with a predominance of brown, ochre, greenish tones, which corresponds to the realistic tradition of depicting peasant life. The central character becomes a simple peasant woman, which was an important step in the development of the art of that time, which increasingly turned to the lives of ordinary people. Friedrich von Ammerling. Friedrich von Ammerling was born in Vienna in 1803 to a family of a jeweler and watchmaker. He received his education at the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, then perfected his mastery in London, Paris, and Rome. Thanks to his talent, Ammerling quickly gained fame and became a court portraitist of the Habsburg imperial family and the Austrian aristocracy. Ammerling was an exceptionally prolific artist. During his long career, he created more than 1,000 portraits. His works were distinguished by subtle psychologism, masterful technique, and special attention to detail. The artist was famous for his ability to convey the character of the depicted person and create a refined atmosphere, which was especially valued by his high-ranking clients. On the left, portrait of Princess Maria Francesca von Liechtenstein at the age of 4. 1838. The composition is focused on the girl's face, emphasizing her features, expression, and childlike innocence. Oil with Ammerling's characteristic smooth modeling and realistic but slightly idealized approach. Ammerling wanted to emphasize tenderness and a slight smile, which was typical for his children's portraits. neutral or slightly draped background so as not to distract attention from the princess's face. The influence of English portraitists, such as Thomas Gainsborough, is noticeable in the softness of features and attention to facial expression. On the right, Portrait of a Boy in a Wide-Brimmed Hat, 1840s, represents a more intimate chamber work. The boy is depicted in a bust or waist format. The wide-brimmed hat creates an interesting compositional accent and characterizes the character. Merlin uses a dramatic chiaroscuro contrast, typical of Romantic painting. The boy's face is illuminated, while the wide-brimmed hat casts a partial shadow on it, creating an expressive play of light and shadow. In this portrait, the artist achieves amazing psychological depth. The boy's gaze is thoughtful. It feels a serious attitude to the world that is not childlike, which is characteristic of the Romantic interpretation of the child's image. The painting is executed in a restrained color palette, with a predominance of warm brownish and ochre tones, which gives the portrait warmth and intimacy. In this work, the mastery of Amerling the painter is especially noticeable. Soft plastic modeling of the face, virtuoso depiction of the texture of materials, fabric of clothing, skin, hair. This portrait demonstrates the artist's interest in the inner world of the child, his desire to convey not only the external appearance, but also the character, mood, emotional state of the young model. A Portrait of an Eastern Woman, 1844. In the Biedermeier era, women artists were forced to lead a modest life away from the public eye along with their male colleagues, as they were long denied access to art academies. One of the most remarkable women artists of that time was Rosalia Amon. Rosalia Amon was an Austrian artist born in Palermo. She was the daughter of artist Carl Amon and received private training from Ferdinand Waldmüller, who used her as his first student for his new teaching methodology. She created wonderful still lifes and portraits, as illustrated by this Portrait of an Eastern Woman. From 1841 to 1847, she regularly and with great success participated in the Academy's annual exhibitions. Works of the artist, who died prematurely in a mental hospital in Vienna at the age of 30, have only recently reappeared on the art market, leading to the rediscovery of this artist. Eastern men and women were not uncommon in Vienna, as the capital was an open and liberal city that attracted a large number of merchants from Italy, Greece, Russia, and Eastern countries. Traditional high themes of art, mythology, history, religion, and the nude, underwent a curious transformation in Biedermeier. If you think that the bourgeoisie of the Victorian era were exceptionally prim and conservative, the paintings on these exhibition stands will make you reconsider this opinion. In the Baroque and Classicism eras, nude bodies of gods and goddesses populated canvases in such quantities as if Olympus had experienced a fabric shortage. But in Biedermeier, the accents shifted. Now the focus was on events related to the House of Habsburg. After all, one had to somehow flatter the ruling dynasty, as well as plots from national history, especially in the multinational parts of the empire, Hungary, Bohemia, and Lombardy Venice. As for the nude, here artists showed amazing caution, as if afraid to shock their bourgeois clients. In Vienna and Budapest, only the bravest painters dared to depict nudes, especially female. Even our favorite Ferdinand Waldmüller, a rebel in teaching methods, turned out to be surprisingly conservative in this area. His nude figures never went beyond strict copies of historical samples. Imagine, an artist who demanded that students draw living nature himself preferred to depict the naked body according to recipes of old masters. However, some artists still dared to be bolder and more sensual. Johann Baptist Reiter's painting Sleeping Woman represents an intimate view of the female body, where the sleeping pose creates a sense of peeping, adding piquancy. And Friedrich von Emmeling's The Souvenir even caused a furor with its sensuality, balancing on the edge of the proprieties of the era. When in 1838 Emmeling's The Souvenir was presented at the annual exhibition of the Vienna Academy, and then at the Brera Academy in Milan, the public's reaction was ecstatic. Italian critic Ignazio Fumagalli did not skimp on compliments. There is not a single part that would not be prepared with the highest degree of scrupulousness. And yet everything was done with a sense of freshness and lightness, just to fall in love with. He was especially impressed by the seductive transmission of bodies, a phrase behind which lies genuine admiration for the eroticism of the work, although, of course, within the bounds of propriety of that time. Italian collectors literally hunted for this painting. It ended up in the collection of Marquis Girolamo Dada and today adorns the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. Imagine, a work created in an era that we often consider puritanical turned out to be worthy of a place alongside masterpieces of the Renaissance. As for August Kanzi and his Portrait of a Woman, 1845, here we see a vivid example of the mobility that characterized Biedermeier artists. This Hungarian painter, educated in Vienna, who worked in Pest and Paris, created his own cultural cocktail, mixing Hungarian national motifs with pan-European trends. The most amazing thing is that Kanzi became one of the first experimental artists who was not afraid of innovations in the technical revolution. While many of his colleagues looked at photography as a vulgar craft, unworthy of real art, Kanzi in 1862 opened his own photo studio and began to use photographic images to create more accurate portraits. Imagine the reaction of academics. It's the same as if today an artist declared that he creates works of art using artificial intelligence. Kanzi experimented with coloring photographs, creating hybrid works, the first Photoshop in history, and applied photographically accurate details in traditional painting compositions. The conservative artistic community, of course, snorted aside at such experiments, considering photography a technical toy unworthy of high art. How can one entrust a mechanical box with creating what requires the soul of an artist? They probably exclaimed over a glass of wine in Viennese cafes. But time put everything in its place. Today, when we live in an era of digital technology and constant mixing of media, Kanzi's innovative experiments at the junction of painting and photography seem incredibly modern, as if he looked 150 years ahead. Perhaps, if Instagram had existed in the 19th century, Kanzi would have been the first to launch a popular account with artistic photo collages. So, walking through the halls of the Leopold Museum, don't rush past these paintings. They hide not only artistic, but also cultural revolutions that anticipated our own time. Why is Biedermeier relevant today? The most amazing thing, Biedermeier has suddenly become incredibly consonant with modern trends. The desire for home comfort, hello Danish hygge, the desire to surround oneself with beautiful but functional things, interest in home gardening and indoor plants, the value of family leisure and home pastime. The next time you arrange flowers in a vase, make a cozy reading corner, or collect cute trinkets, know that you are continuing the traditions of Biedermeier, a style born from the simple desire to make your home a pleasant place after long years of upheaval. Biedermeier is not just a historical style, it's a whole philosophy of life that whispers, home comfort is the real luxury. This presentation was prepared based on materials from the Biedermeier exhibition at the Leopold Museum in Vienna. The exhibition presents about 190 works from Austrian and international collections, from paintings and graphics to furniture items, glass objects, and clothing. The exhibition presents a diverse picture of this era. And in conclusion, I would like to tell you about the artist with whom my interest in Biedermeier began and whose work, The Poor Poet, became the first illustration for this presentation. A self-taught artist, a pharmacist by education, 1808-1885. He was born on February 5, 1808, in Munich, and was one of 3 sons of a wealthy wholesale merchant. His father personally chose professions for his children. The eldest son, Simon, was to become a trade agent, continuing his father's business. The youngest son, Edward, would become a doctor, and the middle son, Carl, would be a pharmacist. And so it happened. Moreover, Carl's other abilities, including his inclination toward drawing, found no support from his father, and only to his mother could Carl confide his desire to become an artist. Only at the age of 25 did Carl Spitzweg, who had already become a pharmacist thanks to his persistence in self-education, come to painting. One could say about him that he was a pharmacist who traded pills for brushes. Imagine, you come to a pharmacy with a headache, and the pharmacist, instead of medicine, draws a caricature of your suffering physiognomy. This is approximately what happened to the art world when Carl Spitzweg, 1808-1885, decided to abandon his pharmaceutical career and take up brushes. Until the age of 30, he mixed powders and prepared mixtures, and then received an inheritance and decided, why don't I send all this to hell and become an artist? And you know what? This was the best career turn of the 19th century. Spitzweg was a real professional peeper. No, not in that sense. He adored observing people with their little quirks and weaknesses. With an album in his hands, he wandered the streets of Munich, making sketches of amusing scenes. A poet writing verses in a tiny attic, the painting The Poor Poet. A bookworm balancing on a library ladder. A night watchman peeking into the windows of lovers. And they say that Spitzweg himself was quite an eccentric. He lived as a bachelor, collected strange objects, and could watch ants for hours. The artist who loved narrow streets and little people. If Spitzweg lived today, he would definitely run a popular Instagram about people on public transport. His favorite characters are not kings and knights, but small officials with a huge sense of self-importance. Old maids watering flowers and spying on neighbors. Tourists who look completely lost. Strange scientists and collectors immersed in their hobbies. And all this is painted with such love and warm irony that it's impossible not to smile. Spitzweg is the 19th century, but with the humor of a millennial. He constantly joked about bureaucracy, the painting The Official, pseudoscientists, the painting The Alchemist, petty bourgeois with their pretensions to greatness, provincial life with its gossip and conventions. But the most amazing thing is that he did it so gently and with such sympathy that even those he was joking about couldn't take offense. He was a man ahead of memes. If the internet had existed in the 19th century, Spitzweg's paintings would have become viral memes. His witty scenes about everyday life of ordinary people, their small joys and ridiculous situations, are direct predecessors of modern comics and humorous sketches. So the next time you see a Spitzweg painting in a museum, take a closer look. This Bavarian joker probably hid some amusing detail there that will make you smile almost 200 years later. And if life seems too serious, remember this pharmacist who prescribed the world a medicine stronger than any pills, an inexhaustible sense of humor. Thank you so much to everyone who listened to my presentation about the Biedermeier period. I truly appreciate your time and attention. If you enjoyed the content, I would be delighted if you could give it a like or subscribe to my YouTube channel. Your support means a lot to me and helps me continue creating more art history content. Thank you again,